There's some kind of misunderstanding here.
What?
We're American, okay?
Okay. What kind of American are you? You don't know?
Last week, Nick Jones, the guy that makes all of our content look amazing and our cameraman, was scrolling through our YouTube comments and basically had an outburst over some of these comments that were coming in about clapping our fellow Americans. And I can smoke this guy, I can smoke you with my SKS from 3 miles away. Cool kid, but you're just gonna be a loot drop. Nick was not having it.
Yeah, it's dumb. Why are we talking about clapping our fellow countrymen and, oh, you can be a loot drop? Yeah, we get it. Like, I don't understand. I don't understand. Everyone's just out to get each other, but for what? What's the purpose? Why are we killing each other?
So for me, those comments don't bother me too much because algorithm, but the very next day, I saw a video on YouTube pop up that was a former SEAL talking about how his end of the world or his collapse plan was to use his skills to steal and scavenge and take from other people to supply himself and his own family. And then the very next day, I saw another YouTube video from a guy, I think his name is Grunt Proof, and he made a video about why it's so important to be a good guy in the end of the world. And it got us thinking, with all this content that we make, this is a topic we need to address. We need to make a different kind of video that talks about why being a good guy in hard times is so important, how to make sure you can be a good guy, and how to avoid having to become a perpetrator of evil.
So we've kind of noticed that there's 3 different levels, and Drew touched on it a little bit, but first of all, there's the proverbial measuring contest that happens in the YouTube comments section, whether it's, hey, I'm gonna smoke check you because I have thermal and you don't. Or, hey, that's cool that you have comms, but when an EMP goes off, none of that's gonna work anyway, so you're gonna be dead.
Or I can listen into your comms.
And exactly. And then there's another level, which is where people are actually saying online, nope, I'm not prepared and I'm aware of that, but what I'm going to do is take your stuff. And it even gets worse, because we've had people who have been invited into our community, into our homes, work with us, and they have told us in person to our face, yeah, my plan is to watch other people, observe them, wait until they get some work done, whether it's setting up a shelter, filtering water, or killing a deer, and then I am going to smoke that person, remove them, and take what they have done already. That is their game plan. So for us, we have already decided to remove those people from our community, not invite them back in, as well as for our own safety, make a mental note of those people if they do show up in a time of distress.
That's all, dude. But this video is not for those guys. This video is not for people who have already resigned themselves to perpetrating violence on innocent people to provide for themselves. This video is for guys like us, who have values, who have morals, who have ethics, who want to be good and do good things in the event of terrible times and want to help each other out at the same time being able to provide for your own family. This video is for you because the truth of the matter is, and it's an uncomfortable truth, that if you see yourself as a good guy at the end of the world, if you want to call it that, but you're not making certain choices today, you're going down a road that is going to lead you to only be able to make evil decisions in order to survive. And let's be real, that's what it's all about, is survival. Or is it? Is it more? Because if you want to build something better, if you want to preserve what is good, then you have to have a plan now to be that good force in the world when everything else has fallen to crap.
If your goal is to not just survive, but to build something, that kind of falls back on something we say all the time, build over break. We're looking to build something that's bigger than ourselves, that takes the future in a positive direction, not just a survival direction.
There's also, you guys have heard the phrase, live by the sword, die by the sword. I know a lot of people have a lot of different interpretations of it, but here's the deal. Everyone is capable of perpetrating violence on other people, right? And the whole idea is, if you live by the sword, if you live by the gun, you're gonna die to it, right? Like it's something you deserve because of the way that you live. The truth of the matter is that the way I see it is, when you live by the sword, you're actually living more dangerously and you're more likely to die because of it. So what we're gonna talk about today is how to reprioritize what you're focused on so that you don't have to make those bad decisions and you can actually be safer when the time comes.
Right. Well, and a quick caveat here. We have, since we launched the company and even before that, stressed the importance of civilians owning weapons of war. We truly believe that the Second Amendment is not with a caveat that some items don't belong inside of that. Nope, it is all encompassing of the Second Amendment. You should be able to own all those things. With that in mind, we are not saying that you should stop buying firearms and ammunition and night vision and body armor and the whole thing that comes along with that. We're trying to say that you need to broaden your mindset in order to open opportunities that may arrive in the future, whether that's tomorrow, 3 weeks from now, or 3 years from now.
Guys, there are a handful of companies that sponsor this channel that make content like this free for you guys, so you don't have to pay a dime to learn stuff and to be entertained and laugh a little bit. One of those companies is Steel Industries. They make some of the best night vision in the game, have the largest collection that is readily available and in stock, and they also have incredible customer support. It's who we get our night vision from, and we've worked with them for a long time. So if you want to save a little bit, 5% off everything that is not currently on sale on their site, you can check out the link in the description. Also, if you're getting into that, you're probably going to be interested in 100 Concepts, another company whose products we've used for years before ever having the fortune of having them as a sponsor for the channel. They make things like scrim covers for helmets. They also make all kinds of anti-reflective devices or hex caps to cover up your flashlights, optics, also your night vision, like this awesome set of day caps here, which also have an adjustment so you can see, you can focus at different distances. So 15% off all of their items, link in the description.
And if you guys are trying to be cost effective and not go too overboard with multiple rifles, multiple sets of night vision or helmets, and instead pay attention to what it is that you're actually investing in, you should know how to take care of the equipment that you do have. So let's say that you have 1 or 2 rifles and you want to make sure that they are up and running and tuned properly. Well, if you don't know how to check for your gas rings, make sure that they're functioning well, make sure that your barrel is running the way that it should, you can go get a little bit of education at SDI, or the Sonoran Desert Institute. They offer a ton of great education where you can actually go get a degree in gunsmithing if that is what you want to do. So go check them out. Link is in the description for them as well.
Now, these weapons of war that absolutely every single American should own and that should have access to, it's because we as human beings, built into our DNA, are wired for violence. I'm just gonna put it simply. That's what we're wired for. We are apex predators. We're at the top of the food chain. It's in our blood. And that's why we focus so much on weapons and plate carriers and night vision and all the things that help you be violent more effectively. And so the situations that we prepare for are violent situations. And that's what most of us, even us sometimes, think about 99% of the time. Things like war, invasion, civil war, or some variation of the Last of Us scenario. And because we're so focused on this, it's kind of like a hammer and a nail. We're so focused on these violent scenarios that that's all we're actually prepared to do. And when you're only prepared for violence, it can lead to becoming a bad guy just to survive.
And it's not a bad thing to start with security. If you look at any of those orders that you need to prioritize, it's not just the march when you're dealing with a patient that needs help, it's S-march. Security comes first. If you're going to stay alive in any exaggerated or dangerous situation, you need to secure and make yourself safe before you can move on and help others. What Drew is saying is the problem is when you stop there only at security, you become that hammer looking for a nail. So, a common way to kind of diagnose some of these issues is to use the Carver matrix. And we've modified what it is that we're going to talk about a little bit, but essentially the Carver matrix talks about combining probability and consequences. What is the probability of a scenario actually happening in conjunction with the consequence of that? Once it lands inside of your graph, you can decide, wow, the probability may be very, very low, but it would be horrendous if that war did happen. And so I need to be prepared. I need to have firearms and ammunition. But instead of just consequences, we're going to bring in a timeline. So Drew, What is the timeline of war that people are generally prepared for right out of the gate without desire or preparation for violence?
So if, real quick, if this wasn't a timeline and this was actually like the probability of something happening and how bad the consequence would be, really what it would be is probability of war, probability of civil war, invasion, Last of Us. It's actually pretty low probability today. The consequence is huge, right? The problem is most people, here's how they prioritize it, including us at times. They think that the probability is high. Oh, actually, probability is high, consequence is high, right? And that's what we all plan for. And that's why we buy 18 ARs and have 6 different concealed carry options and have night vision and body armor, because this is where, by default or by accident, we're incorrectly prioritizing things. Truth of the matter is that if this were a timeline, then war or some sort of invasion or some sort of civil war or some sort of Last of Us scenario, it actually is like, because it's the worst case scenario, it's likely to be the last thing that happens. So let's work from the end back to the front and talk about the things that we should probably prepare for that would lead to something like this, so that when we get to here, we're best suited to make great decisions, not just for the good of all mankind, but even for our own survival. So going from there, what is something that is likely to happen?
Car crash is almost guaranteed at some point in your life.
Right.
A loved one somewhere that you interact with being in a car crash.
Yeah, so we're on a timeline now in terms of like probability, right? So we'll just leave that kind of right here. Car crash, very probable. Right? Do you have any sort of medical training? Do you even know how to put on a tourniquet? Do you have a radio for whenever you're in a place with no service and you need to actually get a hold of somebody for help? Lots of simple things like that. Another thing that everyone's talking about, because it is very likely, is some sort of economic collapse.
Or it could even just be inflation out the wazoo. It doesn't have to be a complete shutdown, but your dollar just simply doesn't go as far.
Yeah, now let's talk about what happens as a result of economic collapse. Josh, you feel free to jump in here, but maybe there's a supply chain breakdown. As soon as, what would you say?
Well, then give me starvation.
Okay, starvation.
So let's also say that you have a car crash right on the tail end or right after economic collapse. If you can't get your car fixed because no one is working on those cars because your dollar doesn't go as far, the problem is significantly bigger when these things start to be combined. And the guns and night vision that you own, they're not gonna help you get your car back up and running unless you sell them. So let's keep going here.
Yeah, so when the economy is bad or when you have some sort of economic collapse or depression, all of a sudden your dollar doesn't go as far, it costs more money to buy food, people stop showing up to work because companies can't afford to run, and over time, and we saw this even with COVID, the supply chain starts to break down. I don't think we'll ever have a problem in America where there's not enough food that exists to feed everybody, but we will see a problem where the food can't get to the people. And within a few days, what is it, like a 3-day rule of supermarkets not having stuff? We saw this with toilet paper. Imagine how bad it's going to be with food and water, right? So when the supply chain starts to break down, then you have people starting to actually get hungry. Right. And when people start to get hungry, they start to make bad decisions.
Maybe riots.
So that's where you have riots. And not only are the riots for, or mobs, they're not just looters, they're also angry about what's happening. And you also have opportunists hopping in, like they're already bad dudes. This is the perfect opportunity to do what they've always wanted to do in the first place. So you have riots, and with the riots come total anarchy, which is, you have raiders, you have marauders, you have bands of people getting together to do bad things.
Now, here real quick is where we kind of bring the initial part where we were talking about all this into this grid system that we have. If all you have is items for The Last of Us and invasion and civil war, and you do not have food and water and medical and an extra plan for transportation and a community to work with you, your options become very, very limited. For example, If you only have a hammer, once again, you're looking for a nail. And if the only tools at your disposal are violence, what kind of options do you have? Number one, join the violence, become the evil that you said back in the day you were going to fight against, or die, or submit to the authority that is willing to pay you, maybe with food or housing, to keep you and your family safe. But in doing so, you're working under the authority of someone else who may be telling you, if you don't do this, you'll be thrown into slavery. You'll be removed from your family. You'll be whatever it is.
Or you're fired and you don't get rations anymore.
Sure.
Whatever it is. So you have, this is where a lot of people fall. Or this is where a lot of good guys will find themselves if they're not prepared for the steps that lead into it. They'll find themselves in the middle of the anarchy, in the middle of the raiding, in the middle of the marauding, not because they were bad guys to begin with, but because they made such poor decisions that they had to resort to this just to survive. And what kind of world does that create? We've seen plenty of governments fall throughout the history of time, and most revolutions end in total anarchy and terrible, terrible things happening. I'd say we're very fortunate in that our founding fathers believed in something bigger than just beating the bad guys. They believed in something much huger and planned for it. And that is what we're trying to get us all back to, is planning for something beyond the hells that come. So from anarchy, raiders, marauders, who's going to step in? Well, if there's not a total collapse of government, then you've got the feds, right? And from the feds, once you have the feds and the marauders and the raiders start fighting, you have even greater authority coming down, which is martial law.
Throw in lockdowns as well.
And you have lockdowns coming in,
which causes civil unrest and so on and so forth.
You're already out of food and you're already out of water and there's a lockdown. You think you're gonna stay inside and just starve to death? No, you're not. So that's where you have total civil unrest happening somewhere in all of this, right? Now we could throw in a natural disaster somewhere at any point in all of this, or maybe this is the thing that starts it all, is a natural disaster. But right here is where a lot of people are going to be turning into bad guys that originally found themselves as good dudes.
There is a storm coming like nothing you have ever seen, and not a one of you is prepared for it.
So we have this escalation of events before the really bad thing happens. So we come up to martial law, we come up to, basically bands of people fighting a government that's trying to keep things in control, trying to keep order, trying to keep the chaos to a minimum, and eventually you have something like a full-blown civil war where lines are drawn, or maybe it's not one versus another guy, maybe it's multiple enemies all fighting each other. And every civil war attracts outside interested parties, and every party in the Civil War is interested in getting help however they possibly can. And that's where you have something like an invasion, where one side accepts help from a foreign government or a United Nations or something like that, and it just ratchets up the craziness even more. And that's where you get something like a full-blown war. That is where you don't want to be, but this is what most people are planning for.
And still, inside of the war, invasion, civil war, lockdowns, martial law, there's that age-old saying, which is novices playing tactics, professionals playing logistics. No army or group of any community is going to accomplish things when they don't have water, food, shelter, security, comms, a team to work with, the gas to transport themselves. Even inside of the worst, you still need to have things beyond just security. While it still comes first, you have a vast amount of needs that fall directly behind.
So as far as needs go, this is common sense, but I don't see it exercised very often. Because the security aspect of it all is so cool, and we're hardwired again into our DNA to be violent. This is usually where most of us start and stop in terms of preparedness. Truth is, yes, you should start there. I really do think you should start there, because if someone can take whatever you have and you have no way to protect it, then what's the point of having it in the first place? You are, at that point, just a loot drop. But beyond that, after you've got an AR or your plate carrier or something like that, or your concealed carry, instead of buying, 30, or 15 other kinds of weapons, and you don't have more food than what is in your cupboards, I don't know who has a cupboard anymore, but your pantry or your refrigerator, what are you actually preparing for? Well, at that point, you're preparing to have to fight or kill someone and take what they have, take their needs to fulfill your own needs, which, by the way, is an effective method, but is not the most effective method, because to do that opens you up to dying also. So have what you need. Beyond security, with food, we'll talk about next steps later in terms of like 1 week, 1 month, that kind of stuff. The water and how to purify it, how to collect it, how to treat it, how to purify it, all that stuff. Shelter, how to fortify your house, how to protect your things. Also, alternate locations or other places to go to. Like Josh said, your comms, you're being able to communicate with your community, making sure you have a good vehicle that actually runs, making sure that you have extra fuel, enough to get you to wherever you would want to go. And then of course, medical. See, this is a more realistic thing to plan for. These are more realistic priorities, and most of these just get completely forgotten about. And that's why good guys who are only focused on security will end up having to perpetrate acts of violence on innocent people to fulfill their own needs. That is what we're trying to help you guys avoid. Now, just in case you think this is a completely unrealistic timeline of events, just keep in mind that anything can set this off and anything can kind of start this chain of events. It doesn't have to be an economic collapse. It doesn't have to be, you know, an outside attack. It could be something like a natural disaster, which you have no control over whatsoever and happens all the time, whether it's a flood, a tornado, a hurricane, an earthquake. Even an EMP doesn't have to be man-made. I mean, you can get that from solar flares and it can absolutely shut down the grid. Any of these things can happen, especially in this early stage, to set about this chain reaction of events. And while you may be prepared for the end of it, you're not prepared for anything at the beginning of it. So, even contagion, right? COVID 2.0, even not a real contagion, but one that's used to manipulate and control people. So let's talk about what you can actually do, or what you should actually be working on right now to make good decisions, not just for the future, but for today, tomorrow, and so on.
Okay, so let's leave needs up there. Let's move some of this stuff down and out of the way. And let's start talking about inside of that timeline. What are those needs? We encourage you guys to start by covering all of your needs at 1 week. And at face value, you may think to yourself, man, I have more armor and ammunition and night vision and whatever it is that you have than the standard infantryman of some random nation gets issued. Congratulations, you have security figured out. But even those infantrymen need to be issued MREs. They need to be issued cold weather gear. If some cold front comes through, if there's a flood, do you know how to work with other people to get past that natural disaster? So you need to move just beyond security, and we need to have a week of food, a week of water, shelter. You probably have a home, that's good. Comms. Inside of that week, who is in my first week of disaster, who am I immediately working with? That's probably going to be family, individuals from your church. If you live in a cul-de-sac and you don't have at least one neighbor that you trust and can talk to and work with, that is a phenomenal first goal, to find someone who is within immediate walking distance that's going to be struggling the same as you. Step one inside of that 1 week is to accomplish at least those parts. Ultimately, 1 week is not going to be good enough, but it does buy you time. You're trying to buy yourself time to figure things out as all of these issues grow in conjunction with each other. 1 month. So if you have a month of food, it starts to get really expensive if you just start looking at how many potato chips can I buy and what kind of chicken pot pies can I throw in the freezer. No, we're talking about things like MREs may not taste very good, but they're very caloric dense and they last for a long time.
I like them.
Yeah, I do too. You don't ultimately want to be eating those forever, but what it's doing is it's buying you time while everyone else is giving up their security by going to a location where other people are panicking and freaking out in the middle of the riots, where you could be staying at home or trading with your neighbors. From there, you need to start considering a season, a handful of months. If something kicks off in the winter, what equipment and food and gear do I need for that one season inside of all of our needs? And ultimately, long term, maybe that's growing a garden, not just in the summer. What are my greenhouse options? What are my canning options?
Starting a small homestead.
Yeah, if I have a deep freezer and I every spring go buy a full cow that's already been butchered, which is what my family did, how am I actually going to keep that meat frozen? Well, shoot, maybe I need a solar system that goes to a battery bank that keeps that freezer up and running for long term. And that's where long term starts to separate it a little bit from just 1 month. But don't feel like you have to bite off more than you can chew right out of the gate. We're not saying you have to go buy a rifle and a suppressor and night vision and lasers and comms and all this sort of stuff.
And a year of food, like
Yeah.
it gets expensive.
Very
And
much.
People see, I think a lot of you guys may look at our channel and see all like the cool gear and gadgets that we have as if we started a year ago. And we've been doing this kind of our whole lives in one sense or another, at least for the past decade. So it does take time to build this stuff up. So don't think that, you have to get it all figured out today, or you already don't get paid a lot of money. Times are already hard, but if you can even just start with a week and then build on a month, if you could stop overspending on security and start focusing on some of these other needs, you're gonna be way better off. Now, I know a lot of you guys are thinking, oh, well, I'm just gonna buy a ton of ammo and a ton of guns and I'm gonna use those to barter with. Okay, I get it. That's not a terrible idea. However, you have to find someone to barter with. You have to find the people that actually have the food that you need or the resources that you need. And then once you go to trade, you're at their mercy. So why rely on finding those people during terrible times when you can use comms today to start building a relationship with them that could be mutually beneficial when the time comes?
Hopefully you guys see kind of what we're getting at here, but here's kind of the bottom line. If you are very well prepared for the last 1% of horrific things that could happen, something like The Last of Us or Civil War, but you are not at all prepared, you are very unprepared for the 99% of things that most likely will take place before these things, like natural disaster, economic collapse, so on and so forth, you are setting yourself up to make the difference between a bad or a bad decision. So stop setting yourself up to be a hammer looking for a nail, and instead start to become that multi-tool that can not just help yourself, but others, because it goes beyond survival. We are looking to build into the future, preserve what we have, and take care of the people that we love as we move forward in life.
And remember, being a good guy, it's not just about doing the right thing. It's actually the best way to survive long term. By having to make bad guy decisions and evil decisions, you open yourself up to that same thing happening to you.
That felt so horribly wrong. What a freak.
Our YouTube comments, and I've already had too many uhs in here. Last week, Nick Jones, the amazing cameraman that makes all of our content so beautiful,